we've come to the point of this event where it's time to introduce our final speaker. And he is Michiel Cornelissen of Kode21. And he's the strategic director of Kode21. Let's see if we have Michiel already online. Hello, good afternoon.
Hi there. I can see you and it looks like I'm in the picture as well, so I think the connection is working.
Fantastic.
Okay.
How are you doing?
Doing well. I'm very excited about the presentation, very honored also to be able to join this event, and very curious about the reactions.
Brilliant. Before your presentation, I would like to ask you one question. This is actually the same question that I asked from Antti Ruuska of Ylva at the beginning of the event. As a kind of long-term advocate and circular design specialist, can you still remember what was your epiphany in terms of circular design and circular economy?
It's a good question. I don't know if there was one singular event. I think it's something that's been brewing for a long time. So even back in college, which was somewhere in the last millennium, I was already interested in sustainable design, and I did some courses and a project in that direction. But I didn't really know how to really make an impact at that time. So I went into healthcare design, and from there, my career sort of went in all kinds of directions. But I always did keep an eye on the sustainability space. I was very interested in the cradle to cradle movement when it started, and movies like An Inconvenient Truth made a big impact. So I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago that it was like a switch in me that suddenly realized, okay, I am doing all these projects and I'm loving my work, but am I really moving in the right direction when it comes to, for instance, climate change? And the answer was clearly no. And then I started this process of trying to figure out how the intersection, the connection between design and climate change and climate solutions specifically could work and could be effective. And that's where, with a couple of detours, Kode21 came from.
Excellent. And now we will hear more about your work and your company. So please.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, so Kode21, we call ourselves a climate solutions design agency, although we may take that a bit broader at some point. What the name is about is that we try to design specifically for the problems of the 21st century, but at this moment climate change is really at the top of that list. Next slide. So I want to start with a few statements, and I think this one is probably no surprise to most of the people in the audience. Next slide. But it may be that this one is a little bit less known. So we actually kind of know what to do to stop global warming, and we don't really need all that much new technology to be able to execute that. Next slide. So what we're trying to do in Kode21 is to find out how these climate solutions that exist and that can, let's say, save us and put us in a good space, how design can help to accelerate the adoption of these climate solutions. Next slide. So this is us. We're 2 designers and a community manager. And I think what we have in common is that we've been doing a lot of work in some amazing companies, really interesting companies, and have been privileged to do very nice nice work there. But we came to this point where we wanted to really focus on the problems that we think most pressingly need solutioned at this time. Next slide. And when it comes to climate change and climate solutions, we found 3 ways that we think design can help with the implementation of climate solutions. The first 2 I'll spend only a little bit of time on. The last one will be a little bit more elaborate. Next slide. So first, the actual design of climate solutions. So for the time being, let's think of things like solar panels and wind turbines. Next slide. We can use our design skills to make these objects and these landscapes, to just make them more attractive, make it easier for people to see the good in it and to be accepting of it. And this is not only about physical objects; it's also about sort of interactions with these solutions. For instance, we're also working on a project that is about the transition of farmers to carbon sequestering means of farming. But this is kind of a story on its own, so I won't spend too much time on it. Next slide. Being designers, we also felt that we needed to know, okay, so we're creating all these products, we're bringing all these systems into the world. How can we do that in a way that produces the least amount of emissions and perhaps even 0 or negative emissions? Next slide. And so we thought, okay, let's find the book or the website or the method that tells us how to do that. And a little bit to our surprise, we couldn't find a completely clear and still, for a designer, understandable method that does that. We found lots of bits and pieces that would help. But at some point we said, okay, let's see if we can, at least for the time being, create our own method. Next slide. So we came up with these 4 steps that are relatively simple, relatively understandable, and still quite sort of fun and creative and inspiring to do as well, that will help reduce emissions from specifically physical products, and can even perhaps at some point bring us to 0 emissions or negative emissions. So it has a lot more subtlety than what I will say now, but the first step is, I think, known to a lot of people. Just make it last. Make your products last as long as possible through upgrades, maintenance, all the circular approaches, and if it's necessary to make it work from a business point of view, then change your business models so you can keep your business going without the need for producing more and more stuff. But that's kind of a promise for the future, we always say, because we're saying, well, in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years, we won't be needing so many new products anymore. But we also have to think about what's happening now, how we are creating these products now. So let's do that with as little resources as possible. Let's look at recycled, but definitely also at bio-based materials that have the potential, at least, to store carbon instead of emit it. And a step that is quite often sort of overlooked or seen as a very separate thing is the use of energy, because in many products the use of energy will actually produce bigger climate impact than the use of materials. So also there, different strategies from technology changes, automation, but also simple nudges in behavior to make it easier to reduce energy use. And in some cases, it might make sense to integrate renewables into the product. Definitely not all cases. Then the last step, I think, is the newest step, because at some point we started thinking, okay, but what that product does is also very important. Can we connect our functions to climate solutions? So, as an example, we did a project for a manufacturer that works on children's prams, and they are optimized to fit into the luggage department of an airplane. And of course, when you do that, you're sort of promoting and facilitating behavior that we probably want to get away from a little bit. So we said, okay, what if you design that pram so that it actually goes on a bicycle much easier, and you're stimulating cycling and those kinds of transport modes. Well, I will tell more about this in the next step, because from here we realized, well, this actually goes for much more than only physical products. This goes for the entire strategy of a company. This can have an influence on your value propositions. And that's how we came to the next tool. Next slide. Yeah, this is an overview of sort of the results from this low carbon process. Next slide. So our last tool is the business of climate solutions. Next slide. And it's really about figuring out how you can use climate solutions to create new, attractive value propositions for a company, and value propositions that are probably quite future-proof, because they are working on the kind of future that we're hoping to achieve. Next slide. And I've mentioned climate solutions a lot, but I haven't said much about what they are. Well, we in Kode21, and based on our inspirations, we define climate solutions as proven technologies and practices that, if you put them all together, can bring us to a society that's zero emissions, and perhaps even beyond, when you start drawing carbon out of the atmosphere to lower temperatures. And at this point, I have to point out that so much of what we are doing in Kode21 is inspired by the work from Project Drawdown. If you don't know them, check them out. They're the original researchers that put all these climate solutions together, did all the math, did all the calculations, all the descriptions. It's really a description of how our world should be looking in a couple of decades. Next slide. And the great thing about many of these climate solutions, they bring all kinds of co-benefits. So they're not only climate solutions, but they will also bring benefits in areas such as health and biodiversity, in water savings, in reducing waste. Next slide. And not unimportantly, this is not something that a company only has to do because of some kind of a philanthropical approach. This is really a business opportunity. Next slide. So in Kode21, we use about 70 climate solutions, and we divided them over eight clusters. And I see this as sort of the building blocks of our world, the building blocks of just about anything that we want to create in a climate positive future. So this is about manufacturing, very similar to what I was talking about in the low carbon tool. It's about energy, where it comes from and how efficiently we use it. It's about our buildings, which essentially are just big products. So also there, can we make them from bio-based materials and store carbon in that way? But also, how efficient can we make them? Can we make them energy producers instead of users? In transport, it's about electrifications of just about everything. It's about finding alternative transport, such as public transport, walking and cycling, and about making that all very efficient. Health and education is a story all by itself, but there's a big link between health and education and emissions. So that's something we want to promote as much as possible. And food is, of course, very important. Moving to plant-based foods, but also reducing food waste are very important ways of reducing emissions. And then how we create that food, but also how we create that those bio-based materials with an agriculture that doesn't deteriorate our environment, but that regenerates it and that stores carbon. And lastly, luckily, we have carbon sinks as well that draw carbon out of the atmosphere into nature most of the time still, because technical carbon sinks are very small still at the moment. So this is about restoring and protecting forests and wetlands all around the world. So these are the building blocks. Next slide. And this is the process that we use to use those building blocks to come to new value propositions. So we need to know how your organization works. We need to know about the value propositions that you're currently giving and for which customers you're working. But we also need to know about your superpower. So what is your company really good at? What can you bring into the world? And then we choose from that set of characteristics, we choose where to link those to the climate wheel that we just saw. And there's a creative process for it that results in all kinds of creative ideas for value propositions. And then, of course, we need to cluster them, we need to select them, and we need to bring them hopefully to a level of implementation where they can start working for a company. Next slide. So, as an example, we did this process. We used this process, this tool for a company that we work with a lot. That's Philips Healthcare. And even in a small exercise of only about 2 hours with 8 participants from Philips, from Kode21, other creatives, somebody from Project Drawdown was there. Before you know it, we had 400 ideas as starting points for these climate solutions-based value propositions. Next slide. And just to make it a little bit more concrete about what kind of things we could be talking about, we'll show you 4 examples that we worked out in a little bit more detail. Next slide. So to start with, the systems and the rooms that we create for hospitals, we as in Philips, they're often characterized by using very functional, rational, but also very cold materials such as plastics and steel. Next slide. So we said, okay, what if we try to figure out how much of that could be replaced by bio-based materials? Again, they have the potential to be carbon negative. They can store more carbon than is emitted during their creation. But there's another potential as well, because a lot of these materials tend to be a lot more sort of natural, a lot more warm in their radiation, and it might actually be able to create environments that are much more conducive to become a healthy place that way. Next slide. And these bio-based materials, they're an enormous range, and it seems to be increasing every day. So of course there are the known, the old materials such as wood and cork and plant fibers, but there's all kinds of bioplastics being developed. There's mycelium, which is finding more and more uses. There are materials that store carbon via biochar, and there are materials that are becoming as strong as some of the best carbon fiber materials that are out there. Next slide. So this is an example of the kind of value proposition that we try to achieve. Something that is good for customers, for patients in this case, but that also brings a benefit for our climate, that finds ways to reduce emissions. Next slide. Energy was already mentioned as an important aspect of emissions, but also of solutions. And interestingly enough, in hospitals, we think that a lot of energy is wasted. Actually, there's definitely a lot of energy used, and a lot of it is probably wasted. Next slide. And that's because our systems aren't very intelligent yet. They sort of have to be set up for the most demanding patient, even if not all those patients need that much light, that much heat, or need the systems to be on. Next slide. So we came up with a system that we call patient-centric energy management, where we really tailor heating and lighting for what each individual patient or each individual room needs. And that way we're creating better and healthier environments. We're improving health outcomes, while at the same time saving energy, saving costs, and of course saving emissions. Next slide. And you can do other interesting things, such as some of the non-critical procedures might be scheduled in such a way that they're being done when we know that a lot of low-cost renewable energy is going to be available. We can prompt hardware and software upgrades that will lead to better efficiencies. Next slide. So again, we think we can combine patient benefits with cost savings and with emission reductions. Next slide. A very sort of all-encompassing look at climate solutions in this healthcare space is to think that, okay, what we are doing for a company like Philips and for other companies as well, and other organizations, Philips could do for their clients. They could do it for hospitals. Next slide. Because those hospitals are also looking for ways to reduce emissions, and we already offer a lot of consultation in terms of planning, in terms of what the best system is, where it should be, the routing of hospitals. Why not add to that consultancy on how climate solutions can improve hospitals? So we can get a little bit of an impression of what this might mean for a hospital that aims to extend and modernize in the next little animation that we have. Next slide. So here you can kind of see these layers of climate solutions being added to the hospital. This is about providing walking, cycling, and public transport infrastructure while reducing car infrastructure. It's about where the energy comes from, not just from solar panels on the roof, but also by sharing energy production and storage with the neighborhood in a microgrid. It's about using bio-based materials as much as possible and creating a very efficient retrofitted area in that hospital that doesn't use as much energy. And we can definitely also do things like promote plant-based food for patients, for staff, but perhaps also for just people coming out of the subway or living in the neighborhood. Next slide. So this way, climate solutions can help make hospital much more than a place for the sick, but it becomes this center of well-being for the people inside, but perhaps also for the neighborhood. Next slide. And the last concept is really specific for the staff in hospitals. So from a very rational point of view, you could imagine that staff would benefit from an app that tells them what their schedule is, when where they can put their holidays in, where they can have professional communications. But we think once you have an app like that you can do more with it. Next slide. We think it can make the lives of staff easier and healthier in lots of other ways by sort of introducing these climate solutions that will also, of course, reduce emissions. Next slide. So, for instance, we can make it easy to find a ride share. So you're not all going in separate cars from work and to work. But also we can optimize those schedules for making it really easy to hook onto public transport times. So you never miss that bus again. You never miss that subway again. Next slide. We can provide options for plant-rich food that also are optimized for so the best performance in these difficult medical professions. Next slide. And we can help people to team up for walking and cycling, for instance, to go to work or to go from work. Next slide. So it's again this combined benefit for the planet, for the people using the product, and for the company that produces the app. Next slide. So I've come to the end of what I wanted to show, and I hope this has inspired a little bit people to think about, okay, what could these climate solutions, what could that mean for our organization? How could we make use of that to come to new value propositions that are good for us, that are good for our customers, and that are good for the planet?
So much, Miguel. I just love the hospital concept. I think it's a fabulous example of how to not just design the building and functions within it, but also looking at the whole project from the ecosystem perspective and what could and should be done when it comes to surroundings and how the entire ecosystem can work. One question regarding the kind of decision-making process, you talked a lot about kind of strategic level and also kind of very specific climate solutions. When you're talking to executive directors or board of directors, is it so that they've already made their minds around, yes, we need to go towards zero carbon, or is there a kind of debate whether it's necessary or not? At what stage do you actually step in?
Yeah, I think it varies incredibly, but what you see a lot is that there are very lofty goals for maybe 20 years from now or even more, and much more modest goals for the next 5 years or the next 10 years. And I would like to see that changing. And I think by showing these kind of examples, it makes people realize that you don't always have to only think incrementally, but you can sort of leapfrog to the situation where you really want to be eventually, and find a path to get there. So, but I do notice that I think the openness to these kinds of ideas and these kinds of approaches seems to be much, much more than it was even 2 or 3 years ago. I'm an optimist, but I really do think that there is a change happening, that people realize we have to do things differently. So they're open to ideas for that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Michiel, so much. We will be following your work with great interest.
Thank you so much. It's been a great honor to present here.
Thanks. Now, dear folks, it's time to start our final poll of the day. And the question is, do you think your organization should invest more in circularity and or climate solutions? And now I would really like your immediate replies. And meanwhile, you are replying, I would like to welcome Ia back on stage with me.
Thank you, Anne.
It's been quite an afternoon.
Yes, thank you, and especially thank you to all of our wonderful speakers. It's been a pleasure there on backstage, of course, following all of the presentations. And yeah, it's always very delightful to understand or get the big picture and see what's actually happening in companies.
Yeah. Any concluding remarks or maybe any learnings, realizations from this afternoon?
Well, of course, a lot. I think there were different sort of things brought up by different speakers, and I think, I notice when I listen to these things, and of course, sort of coming from the business world, the importance of understanding that we have to sort of accept the fact that many of the companies and organizations are still taking baby steps. And it is really important to understand sort of the maturity level of where we are and where we want to get, and in a way break it to steps so that it feels rewarding to step by step get towards the desired goal. I do think that one thing that I think Kinga brought up was the need for visualizations and prototyping. And that is something that I'm very much pro myself, because I realized that oftentimes, it feels like we're talking about very abstract things, and that we are overwhelmed by the need for change, which is there. I mean, we definitely need to change our ways of doing business. But then it helps if we can sort of prototype these ideas at the very early stage, and in that, by doing so, to bring everybody in the organization on board, and make everybody discuss about what kind of moves we potentially could make when designing our future. So that's one thing that I came to think of. How about you?
So many things, but maybe one thing to kind of pinpoint. I'm a vision person. Mm-hmm. And when I was listening to all these people, when they say that we actually didn't get a light bulb by trying to create a better candle. So kind of seeing something that doesn't exist yet, envisioning it, and being so determined that you actually go and do it. And I think that these pioneers and these inspiring examples is something that they really have a lot of power kind of to push us forward. And I think that's why it's so great that we've had hundreds of participants at this event as well, to kind of hear and learn, and sort of there's always kind of seed that gets planted. And then when you go back to your workplace and start talking about this, I feel that there's kind of power of people and kind of power of that common vision. And that kind of got really clear to me this afternoon. So I'm really grateful for being here and listening to all these true stories, so to speak.
Yeah, I truly think so. And then also to understand that, sort of understanding the basics of design thinking and circular economy, it really helps us understand that those can and should be applied when making any business decision. So it's no longer an alternative in a way, because clearly I think Antti's presentation was very, of course, eye-opening again, and sort of pushing us a little bit to the uncomfortable zone, if we wish. But I think it's really important to understand that we have no alternative. So not only the sort of economical model that we are stuck to rethink that, but also to understand that really the facts regarding climate change, for example, the fact that once we go, and I believe we will unfortunately go beyond 1.5 degrees, so it probably will be closer to 2 degrees, and the economic wealth doesn't really play, or the wealth that we're used to, sort of the profitability of businesses, they don't really serve us after that. So we have so big challenges and problems facing us that we really need to understand that it's no longer an alternative. It's not an idealistic thought to apply these sort of circular design methods and so forth to our businesses. It's a must. It's no longer nice to have. It's a must. And I think this should be an empowering feeling created by this fact, and also extremely important to learn from each other, so that we don't sort of lead things in silos, or sort of we cannot even maybe have ownership of those thoughts and those ideas or so forth in a way that we used to in an old competitive landscape. But rather, it's all about sharing economy, and I think this is extremely important for us all to internalize this fact. So it's good to have these reminders, and I think going back to our organizations and actually sort of again coming back to small steps and sort of questioning the ways that we've done, or the ways we've been doing things before, but just sort of encouraging people to really question those, but with a smile in the face and with a lot of hope.
Absolutely. Shall we look at the poll results?
Yeah, let's look at the poll results.
So, do you think your organization should invest more in circularity or climate solutions? Fantastic. Definitely right away, 70%. I think Design Forum Finland has been doing a marvelous job this afternoon, kind of getting more and more people on board when it comes to circular and climate solutions. Really good. In the near future, 30%. There's no one who wouldn't be convinced. That's a good result. But Ia, would you like to tell us what's coming in this
and
also?
And what's ongoing?
What's ongoing? What's ongoing too? Yes.
Absolutely. Happy to. So one thing that I'd love you all to pay attention to is our Fennia Prize design competition that is ongoing. And it's sort of a competition that the idea is to really show how your organization, your companies have walked the talk, so to say. What kind of ideas you have been able to accomplish into whether it's business models, new products, new services, and to enroll those projects, those ideas to the competition. That's one thing that is ongoing until the 15th of October, and you certainly find much more about the competition by visiting our website. So that's definitely something I'm hoping to many of you to pay attention to. So warmly welcoming you to participate in this competition. So that's one thing.
Fantastic. We have come to the point when it's time.
Yes.
Say thank yous.
Yes, and I'm really also hoping to be able to thank you, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, for amazing continuous collaboration. It is a pleasure to collaborate with you. So hoping the partnership to continue in the future as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Ia.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you to you, our participants. Fantastic. Thank you to all our fantastic speakers. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope it's been a really informative and inspiring afternoon for you. Let's continue the conversation. So the Twitter hashtag is Design Forum Talk. And we'd also love to hear your feedback, so we'll be in touch. Thank you. Hope to see you soon. Bye.
Bye.